Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here today. Before I start, of course, I want to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional territory of signatories of Treaty 7. I also want to acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who have a deep connection with this land. I am Mike Ellis. I am the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, as well as the Deputy Premier for the province of Alberta. I'm also joined by Mike Letourneau, Superintendent from the Alberta Sheriff's Branch, as well as Mayor Lance Colby from the town of Carstairs. Thank you both, of course, for being here today. Just over a year ago, I announced a series of new measures to protect Albertans and keep our province safe. At the time, I indicated that Alberta's government would provide more than $27 million in new funding to boost the Alberta Sheriff's operational capacity and their ability to augment and support existing police services in carrying out functions that further enhance public safety. Today, I'm pleased to say that those efforts have been proven tremendously successful, and they continue to make Alberta's streets and communities safer every single day. The latest addition to those efforts include even more specialized capacity to fight crime in rural Alberta. Alberta's government will do whatever it takes to keep people safe, and I am pleased to announce the creation of 2 new plainclothes surveillance teams to support the RCMP in carrying out surveillance on criminal targets in rural Alberta. These 2 teams are now fully operational and ready to tackle rural crime right across this province. Although the Alberta Sheriffs currently have an existing surveillance unit that is part of the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team, or ALERT, their efforts are focused mainly on serious and organized crime investigations. The RCMP also has its own surveillance capacity, but like the sheriff teams attached to ALERT, it's focused mainly on major investigations. Now, 2 new surveillance teams are filling a gap by helping rural RCMP detachments with local investigations to combat local crime. Think, for example, of break-ins being committed by prolific offenders for fuel thefts from farmers, as an example, an issue I know is plaguing far too many communities. These are the types of cases that cause plenty of concern for rural Albertans, and they need solving as well. One of the new units will serve rural communities in northern Alberta, while the other will be serving rural communities in southern Alberta. Their addition will significantly enhance law enforcement's ability to surveil criminals and suspected criminals in rural areas where there is often little capacity in which to do so. So I will repeat what I've said many times before. There is no safe haven for criminal activity in Alberta, full stop. We know that police in Alberta's front lines already do a commendable job of finding and removing criminals from our cities and our communities, and they'll now have an additional support, an additional tool in the toolbox when it comes to gathering evidence and intelligence that will help further disrupt crime in our province. Alberta's government is taking action to enhance the sheriff's ability to perform specialized law enforcement functions. Alberta's police services are more focused on frontline duties, and it means more resources to keep our communities safe. Both new surveillance teams are fully staffed and operational, and we've been in close contact with our partners in the RCMP to communicate how they can request their support. The creation of these surveillance teams is just one more way that we're expanding the role of the Alberta Sheriffs, while at the same time augmenting existing police services to better protect Albertans. By further empowering the sheriffs to take on more police-like functions, we're not just providing better support to Alberta's existing police services. We're sending a message, the message to convicted and prospective offenders that you are not welcome here. Crime is not welcome in any Alberta community, and rural, urban, or remote. The strong interagency collaboration that we see between the sheriffs, the police, and our other partners in law enforcement is a testament to that. And it's being bolstered by investments made by Alberta's government, which are having a meaningful and measurable impact on protecting Albertans and enhancing public safety. One example, of course, is SCAN, the Safer Communities and Neighborhoods Unit, which over the last 5 months alone has overseen a closure of 9 residential properties associated with drug trafficking and other illegal activity. We've also recently added 20 new positions to the SCAN program. We're working in close collaboration with local police. SCAN does an admirable job of shuttering problem properties and creating disruption and unease for the law-abiding Albertans who live near them. And as Alberta's government takes action on rural crime, we'll continue to advocate to the federal government for bail reform to protect Alberta's in regards to public safety. So in closing, I'm going to reiterate that once again that crime and public disorder in Alberta communities are not going to be tolerated. The creation of these surveillance teams will go a long way to stomping out localized criminal activity in rural Alberta and to boosting law enforcement's capacity to keep Albertans and their properties safe. To the Alberta Sheriffs who are doing this work and to those police services that are working closely alongside them, I offer my sincerest thanks and appreciation on behalf of all Albertans. Thank you. Our province is much safer and better off because of the work that you do. So thank you once again for your time, and I'm now going to invite Mayor Lance Colby to the podium to say a few remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Ellis. I appreciate you inviting me here today. I'm Lance Colby, the Mayor of Carstairs. This announcement is great news for all Albertans. Having surveillance teams, one in the south and one in the north, conducting surveillance of wanted and suspected offenders is a game changer for rural Alberta's fight against crime. Crime continues to be a top concern in the province, with reports of violent crimes, property crimes, and other criminal activity consistently making headlines. Many communities feel vulnerable to the threat of crime and are always seeking ways to protect themselves and their loved ones. I'd like to commend the Alberta government and Minister Ellis for taking this vital step through the Alberta Sheriffs to augment local law enforcement. It is a necessary step to protect Albertans no matter where they live. This funding and the two teams are aimed at assisting and enhancing the RCMP with policing, putting more boots on the ground where it matters most, in rural Alberta. Rural crime affects all residents and all small business owners. Businesses are losing money due to the thefts. Their insurance, like that of all Albertans, keeps going up because of thefts. Every person has the right to feel safe in their home and on their property, and not return home to find their home broken into, their possessions taken, or wake up to find their equipment gone or fuel siphoned from their vehicles. Again, I would like to thank the Alberta government and Minister Ellis for doing whatever it takes to keep the residents of Alberta safe. I now invite Mike Letourneau, Superintendent of Alberta Sheriffs, to the podium to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Colby. Thank you, Minister Ellis. It is a pleasure to announce these surveillance teams are now in place, operationally and ready to assist police services who request them. Their introduction will help fill a gap where there's often a need for additional support. As the Minister alluded to, the Alberta Sheriffs currently have some surveillance capacity, which is directed primarily at supporting investigations into serious and organized crime. They do that through the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Teams, better known as ALERT. These new teams will be available to similarly support criminal investigations, but with a specific focus on Alberta, and specifically rural Alberta. As we know, crime recognizes no bounds. It pays no mind to municipal boundaries or areas of police jurisdiction. Criminals often view these smaller communities, rural areas, as places where they can conduct their criminal activities away from the watchful eye of law enforcement. But their perception is misconstrued as we take yet one more step to protect public safety throughout the province. The implementation of these new units enhances surveillance capacity and coverage province-wide, aiding further in our efforts to make sure that Albertans feel safe no matter where they live. We've appointed two teams, one each, to provide coverage to Northern Alberta and Southern Alberta, respectively. Each team comprises of one sergeant and 7 sheriffs, all of whom operate in a plainclothes capacity. All of those members come from a law enforcement background and have experience in a variety of disciplines and fields. All of them have specialized surveillance training. Their roles will be wide and varied, but mostly they'll be available to help police gather intelligence and information on known and suspected offenders and obtain evidence that will help lead to charges in court. Investigations could include anything from suspected drug operations in residential areas to break-and-enter suspects targeting rural areas, businesses, or industrial properties. More surveillance capacity means more offenders ultimately being removed from Alberta's streets. It means businesses being able to operate without fear of their property being stolen. It means safer Alberta communities. And it further reinforces the message that crime will not be tolerated in any form, capacity, or place. We've been in contact with our law enforcement partners to let them know how they can request surveillance team support throughout Alberta. We look forward to closely working with our partners in the RCMP and other police agencies as we continue to roll out this new initiative. The Alberta Sheriffs are proud to support this important function and to continue to augment Alberta police services in keeping our province and Albertans safe. I will conclude simply by commending and thanking the men and women of Alberta's law enforcement who remain steadfastly committed to that all-important task. I thank you.
That brings us to the question and answer portion of our announcements. We do have some reporters here on the ground. I'd ask that if you do have a question, you could just make your way to the mic to your left, and please state your name and outlet before answering it, or asking a question, please. You guys don't have any questions? I guess just this mic over here. Yeah.
Just Craig Momney with Global News. What led to, I guess, organizing this for rural Alberta? Was there like a heightened crime, a rising crime that you've been seeing in rural Alberta?
No, it's basically a commitment that we've had to folks in rural Alberta who have been the victims of rural crime. Part of this is surveillance units are augmenting and supporting the local detachments. So, as an example, you've heard me say officer presence makes a difference. There's no doubt about that. But due to the vast geographical areas of rural Alberta, there are times where officers are going from call to call and they don't have the time or the capacity in order to do surveillance, as an example. So as the superintendent indicated, this is a tool in the toolbox for detachments all over rural Alberta. If they feel that disproportionately there's an organized crime element that is dealing with kind of, I don't want to say that any theft is petty, but smaller crimes, as an example, that maybe does not reach the threshold of alert, as an example, that deals with the larger organized crime component of it, then obviously these teams, whether it be north or south, will be able to get in, provide surveillance, and work with the local detachment in order to make the arrest and stop the crime.
How much of an impact was the earlier crimes this year at golf courses and the gun range there on setting this up?
Yeah, I think that is a factor. I think maybe the mayor, if you'd like to talk more about the localized crime within the area and how this is needed and the factor that will be. But I will just say this on a very general level is that, whether it be, when I talk to folks in rural Alberta, or I talk to the MLAs that represent rural Alberta, crime and rural crime specifically is quite frankly at the top of the list. And so again, we said we'll do whatever it takes to keep Albertans safe, and that's precisely what we're doing by making sure that we have units like this to augment and support the local detachments right throughout rural Alberta. Thanks. Did you want to say anything? You can, sure.
I feel this is a good move by the Alberta government and the minister. It's going to help the RCMP, especially in the rural areas, because it's such a vast area. If you look at Mountain View County, the area that you have to cover is tremendous. if you can target and identify people who are known criminals who are out stealing property from rural Alberta, farms, industry, it just makes it better that they can target them and arrest them and put them off the street, which is what this unit should be doing and will do. I'm positive of that. So rural Alberta is facing crime. It's slowed down some, I hear, but it's still there, and people need to be safe on their farms and in their communities, and this will definitely help that. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions here from the floor? We don't. Operator, we do have some reporters on the line. I'd ask you to put through the first caller, and can you please state your name and your outlet, please?
First question comes from Catherine Grogowski, Alberta Today. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine Grogowski, Alberta Today. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how this actually works. So if there's a unit, a surveillance unit, and they see a crime in progress, would the idea be that they're just collecting evidence? Are they calling the RCMP to say, hey, come make an arrest? How does it actually work? Because I assume if they're plainclothes, they're not going to be the ones slapping the handcuffs on.
Well, that's not necessarily true. But maybe I'll get the superintendent to talk about a little bit the operational capacity in regards to how this will work with the local detachment as an example. But I think people need to understand that organized crime and offenders that are especially preying on those in rural Alberta, they do surveillance as well. They do surveillance to check on farms as an example, to see if anybody might be on vacation as an example. They do they do surveillance to find out how often police may or may not be driving by a certain area. And then that helps them, make a determination whether or not they are going to break into a particular home and quite frankly, whether or not, how much time they might have. So surveillance teams in rural Alberta that are not meeting that high threshold of the big organized crime that Alert is going after, which is obviously stopping the fentanyl from coming into Alberta, or some of the cartels that have kind of set up shop here in Alberta. That's where Alert is focused. But when we're talking about those individuals that are preying upon rural Albertans, surveillance teams are a huge factor. But in regards to the operational component of that, maybe the superintendent might step in here.
So as mentioned a couple times here today, so they are functioning as a support unit. So they usually have, whether it's an RCMP member, police agency member, attached to them. That could be at a detective level, it could be at a constable level, a street level. They usually give them their tasks, their targets, and their goals ultimately in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So what we hope to achieve here is that in these smaller detachments where we have young RCMP members that are working, possibly two, three members to a town, they're aware of people that are going out at night doing break and enters. Our team would get on those type of people, surveil them with the objective being to arrest them when they are conducting a break and enter. So in that example, they're doing it as they see the crime happen. If they're committing crimes, depending on what that crime is at the time, it gets assessed, and then an immediate phone call to the investigator that's trying to wrap up a file, and that investigator makes the call on the arrest.
Catherine, did you have a
And if I may follow up, I'm wondering who gets to decide where these resources are allocated, because that's a pretty vast geographical area to cover.
Yeah, it sure is. As you know, we're only 6 weeks into this, so the queue is not extensively long. We anticipate it's going to get longer and longer as we build those relationships throughout rural Alberta with the RCMP. So we'll have a priority matrix in place so that, of course, we're going after the offenders that are going to make the most impact to the community's safety, number one priority. And then it'll go into a tier 2 system where we look at recidivism. So these are going to be your repeat offenders on property crimes that are really doing damage within the rural communities. So that's how it'll be established.
We do On the line. Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Next question comes from Lisa Johnson at Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. So I just want to get a little bit of clarity on this. We don't know exactly where these surveillance teams are being deployed at this moment. Are we going for like a panopticon effect here where everybody can assume that in their community there's probably some surveillance officers?
Well, again, I'll let the superintendent talk here, but these teams are going to be one in Calgary and one in Edmonton. And as the superintendent indicated here that they're going to be working collaboratively with the RCMP, as well as making those relationships with all the detachments throughout Alberta. Again, these things are situational dependent. There are, as the superintendent indicated there, whether it be people that are repeat offenders, somebody that has been identified by a street unit within the community that might require assistance from surveillance in order to stop the crimes and the B&Es in that area. And again, as the superintendent indicated, they'll be creating a matrix. As we've said before, we're going to do whatever it takes to keep Albertans safe. And quite frankly, if the superintendent, local police detachments, as an example, the RCMP, Alberta sheriffs come back and say, you know what, there's a huge need for this and we need to expand this, then that's something that we'll consider. I don't know if you want to talk about the operational thing one more time. Sure.
Yeah, operationally, so I understand the question, but we can't be everywhere all the time. Obviously, we're a smaller unit, but there, as was spoken about, there are surveillance teams all over Edmonton, all over Calgary, all over rural Alberta that are currently doing surveillance on targets. So we're, as a primary measure, we want to get into these smaller communities to make the biggest impact. How that list looks right now is very difficult to say until we start looking at this list get, I guess, larger and see where the competing priorities are. So there's also, if we do have investigators that are free and able to assist and require our support, we're going to try and be there for them.
Lisa, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, thanks for that. This is for the minister. Not completely off topic, but I wanted to ask you about the situation in Cold Lake. We're seeing a ballooning population of folks who are living on the streets there. There's obviously a lot of complex issues going on in regards to that when it comes to mental health and addiction issues. But have you spoken with Mayor Copeland about the situation in Cold Lake recently, or do you plan to? Because it appears as though they are hiring their own officers, their own private security. So I wonder if you're considering offering sheriffs up there as you have in other municipalities in Alberta.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't recall the last time I spoke with the mayor, and I do recall conversations that I've had, and I'm trying to remember if it was the mayor or not, but certainly with representatives of the community, as an example, or people that live in the region. And yes, there are social and civil disorder. There's obviously mental health and addiction concerns. We are happy to provide any assistance, again, augmenting and supporting whatever resources that they have in there. I have not specifically spoke to Minister Nixon, but what I do know of Minister Nixon is that he's very much engaged in a lot of the stuff that's going on throughout Alberta. He might know more about this particular subject than I do, but when you talk about augmenting, supporting, and seeing how the sheriffs could provide some assistance up there, certainly we are more than happy to help all municipalities in Alberta, quite frankly.
Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Next question from Shalon Skolsky at CTV News. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. I'm, again, just more of an operational. I'm hoping you can provide more information about the teams. The 16 officers, are these all new hires, and how much will it cost for them to operate annually? And about their training, there was a mention of specific training to surveillance in rural Alberta. What does that mean?
Sure.
I'll start going, I guess, back to the your last question to your first question. So last question being training. So they are all trained in advanced mobile surveillance. So this is the provincial standard across Alberta. So all of these members are trained in static surveillance, which is, of course, what it implies, so being in one spot, and mobile surveillance, so on the move. Without giving out too many tactics, they are trained in rural surveillance as well as mobile rural surveillance, static rural surveillance. There's lots of investigative techniques that are utilized in those type of areas. So yeah, that covers off training. And what were your other two questions?
If you could talk about the 16 officers, are they all new hires? Are they existing from the Alberta Sheriffs? And then also just in terms of the budget, how much does it cost to operate annually?
So all of the sheriffs are, well, sheriffs. They originate from being sheriffs. They have extensive experience, some of which have upwards of 17 years surveillance experience. So it kind of runs from being a 1-year sheriff to about like I said, 17 years of experience. So there's on average, maybe of the 8 members on a team, 3 or 4 of them have extensive experience, and then we brought on new people during expansion. To run the North and South teams, you're looking at about $2.1 million.
Shay, did you have a follow-up question?
I did, yeah, thank you. And it's to the Minister. The announcement comes less than a week after the Federal Public Safety Minister wrote to the Solicitor General in BC, providing some certainty on the future of the RCMP, committing to honoring contract policing obligations. I know you've raised concerns about vacancies of RCMP officers in our province. I guess, do you continue to have concerns about the way the RCMP are operating here? Is that an extension of what this announcement is about?
Well, let me just say this. I have nothing but respect as a former police officer myself for the constables and the corporals and the sergeants and the boots on the ground that are doing the best that they can to attend calls to service all throughout rural Alberta. The critique I have is more so towards the organization, we'll say, as a whole. As I've indicated before, I don't have the most recent numbers, but in and around 400 plus officers short from the authorized strength that we were supposed to have in the province of Alberta. It certainly is not reasonable to pull more officers who really should be attending calls to service in rural Alberta off the street in order to do surveillance. So again, as I have stated, we are going to augment and support all of our police services in Alberta. This is just another example of augmenting and supporting police services, and we are going to do whatever it takes to protect the people of Alberta. And I've said this before very publicly as well. I do not, I appreciate some of the challenges that the RCMP are having regarding recruiting, but if you take that 400 that we're short here in Alberta, and then you multiply that, as I've talked to colleagues right throughout Canada who have contract policing, now we're talking about numbers in the thousands of potential shortages, and we don't have time for the RCMP to figure out their recruiting and training and deployment, and so we're going to keep Albertans safe, and this is just another example of that.
That concludes our press conference today. I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and any follow-up questions, you can just follow up via email with me. Thank you.